Shayna Goldman from The Athletic is with us for her Friday appearance. Hi, Shayna. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very good. As is life, Marty, for Dylan Cozens, wouldn't you say?
I'd like to get a 22nd birthday present. That was $49.7 million. But, that's what he got, and that's great. Now, at first, I look at that deal, and most people are looking at the deal saying, great. Like, Dylan's been awesome this year playing with Quinn and Peterka. 7 years at 7.1. It's fantastic. It's just under Tage Thompson. But then I look around the NHL on centers that are under 25 making in that $7 to $8 million range. And I pulled up Josh Norris in Ottawa, Nick Suzuki, Elias Pettersson, and Nico Hischier. And then I'm like, ooh, like I know Tage Thompson is in that group, but is Dylan Cozens in that group as well with those four young centermen around the NHL?
He isn't yet, but he will be. I think by the mid to end of that contract, absolutely. And that's the whole thing. Like every single move in the NHL is a risk. There's risk affiliated with every single thing you do, whether it's a signing, an extension, a trade, anything. It's all about managing that level of risk. And in a situation like this, you could take it two ways. Your risk is that you go for a bridge deal. Player pops off, and now you have to pay them even more, and your salary cap situation looks even different than you originally anticipated. The other tricky part of it is you might be paying that player later. Now the risk is, how does that contract look at the end when they're in their 30s versus their late 20s? And it's a big difference based on aging curves. Obviously, there's outliers, but is that something you want to rely on? Typically, no. That's why free agent contracts, on the unrestricted free agency market don't always work out. For this, you're betting on a player to perform at the level you anticipate of them in their prime. You're paying for future and you're paying for present performance. And that's the ideal way to do it. So that's the right kind of risk. The thing here is he's different than some of those players you mentioned. Nick Suzuki was paid more and he's more of a defensive center and a good playmaker. So it's a little bit different there. And then you have someone like Josh Norris, who had a lot of the points because he played with someone like Brady Tkachuk at even strength and has a lot of power play performance too. For Cozens, the reason I like the risk is that we see he's not playing with Tage Thompson at even strength. He's not playing with Alex Tuch. He's not playing with Jeff Skinner. He's the driver of his line. And we see below the surface all the encouraging signs. And then as the season progressed, we see the encouraging signs really come to fruition on the score sheet. So if you're building off of that, I think you're moving in the right direction. So that's the risk you want to take.
So who's the best one? I just want to quickly, who's the best one of the four that I mentioned now? Norris, Suzuki, Pettersson, and Hischier. I think Hischier. Okay. I was going to lean Hischier or Pettersson, but I felt like you were probably going to go Nico Hischier. And so you think that Dylan Cozens could get to where Nico Hischier is at right now?
It's a little different because Cozens is a 2C. So I think that maybe his performance might be pulled back a little bit by the fact that where his place in the lineup is, he's never going to have the team's top end wingers. But Hischier's also a really good defensive specialist. And I do think Cozens has that skill set to be a good disruptor like that. But I could see him maybe being just a tier below Hischier in the long term. And even Pettersson, I think we have to judge a little bit differently because we look at the chaos of Vancouver and how that's dragged him down.
Yeah. The thing with Pettersson is I don't know how often you guys do this, but every now and again you'll watch a game. And for me, I just I would term it, I fall in love with a player all over again. And I feel like Pettersson does that for me. I can go long periods of time and then I'll watch a game and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I love this guy's game. I kind of had a sneaking suspicion he might win hardest shot too at All-Star. And that's just the beauty of him. He's kind of unassuming, but he's just so gifted. But it's hard to argue with your point about Hischier. Now, Shayna, when you and Dom wrote about contracts and projections, and I think you had Dylan at a lower number, around 6 million, probably, as opposed to 7, which is certainly understandable. I'm curious, how big a leap has Dylan taken this year alone in your projections for him contractually?
Yeah, I think I was a little bit too cautious with my original predictions, and I should have been a little more hot takey, which is something I'm always trying to rile back a little bit, because with this, I was trying to look at the context of the Sabres and say, well, Tage Thompson makes 7-1. How many players are going to make more than that? It does feel like that's the cap for their forwards because Skinner was signed by a different general manager. And you think that there's going to be a little bit more of a gap between your 1C and your 2C. Having said that, I like that this is a low 7 instead of a high 7 for Cozens, because I think that does feel fitting. What impresses me is what I said before, like he's the driver of that second line. He's elevating the players around him. So when you look at that and you look at his age and you also consider how you expect the Sabres to get better, right? Are we all going to be surprised if in 2 years there's a legitimate, high-end second line winger to play with him and bring his game up a notch too? Like, I think all of that contributes to the fact that like we should be increasing our projections. And then when you consider league trends, which are higher than what he got, it's hot, Tim Stützle makes more, Josh Norris makes more, Nick Suzuki makes more. So, I think all of that has to be taken in stride and can kind of increase that original, maybe he'll be in the $6 million range.
So right now, the Sabres are sitting in 29th place when it comes to the penalty kill. Usually there's always that one guy that your team takes a penalty. The coach doesn't even have to say their name. They get the leg over the board and they're the first one to go out there and kill maybe 45, 50 a minute of that the top power play unit is on the ice for the other team. Dylan is not that guy just yet, but could he be also a guy that could perform at 70, 75 points, 80 point season, but be the first leg over the boards when you kill a penalty?
Yeah, so I made charts for this because I was really curious about how the Sabres stack up around the league when, Duff, when you asked me about the penalty kill, I love talking about forwards on the penalty kill so much. So generally speaking, teams, the strategy, especially now for the teams that are going for more of an offensive penalty, which is what you want to do. You want to have a little bit more dimension. You're not just sitting back and withstanding 2 minutes of a team's best power play unit, is they break up their top 2 units in 2 ways. First unit goes over the board, generally starts at the faceoff dot, is more defensive. And sometimes they have good metrics, but it's the second unit that you really want to watch. That's the unit that's going to come on with tired legs of that first power play unit, going to come over the boards and start over on the fly. They tend to have better impacts on both ends of the ice. And it's not surprising. If you generate more offense, you're not playing it back in your own zone as much. So there's that correlation. And yes, it's a risky strategy doing it that way and having more offense. But if you're playing with the puck, you're not playing against the puck. So, it's a good thing to have. The Sabres don't have that like definition between, the on the fly and who's playing at the dot and things like that. And I think this might help them if they do it. If you look at like the gold standard, it's the Carolina Hurricanes. The first over the boards, you're going to want players like Jordan Staal, and he has good numbers. But second over the boards, you're going to have Aho and Teravainen, and those are your disruptors, and they're the ones that really make it a power kill. So the Sabres have an interesting question to answer, and it's where do they think Cozens should be? Should he be the one that's over the boards and is used as the disruptor, and he can be very good on the second penalty kill unit doing so? Or do you want him to be the one that goes over the boards? Generally speaking, more offensive players don't play that role, but there are exceptions, and Mitch Marner is a perfect one of that. He plays with David Kampf, and the two of them tend to go over the boards first, be out for the faceoff dot, and they have some of the best shorthanded impacts on both ends of the ice in the league. So it really depends where the Sabres see Cozens, which one is better. I think to start, it might be really defining him as the player that goes on the fly. And then as he progresses, I think they can start shifting him into the player that goes, over the boards first and becomes that top penalty killer.
And Marty, and as Shayna and I talked about briefly last week, the one thing with Buffalo this year is that they've been near the top in shorthanded goals. And certainly early in the year, we saw that aggression from a number of different players. We had broken down shot attempts that they were getting while shorthanded. It was so impressive. Now, Shayna, when you actually look at the Sabres, and Marty and I talked about this yesterday, the fact that just because you play a lot of shorthanded minutes doesn't mean you're a good penalty killer. Sometimes it's just by default. That's your roster. It's like, okay, we get out there and do your best, kid. Now, when you look at the Sabres, who would you identify as their best penalty killers?
I really like what Dylan Cozens has done because I think he has like that disruptor ability, and he is starting a little, like he's below average in on the fly starts. So he can do it both ways. And I like what Kyle Okposo has done too in his minutes, because we see the team isn't as offensive in terms of like shorthanded impact in expected goals, but he is really strong defensively. So he's not he's not just withstanding it, he's doing enough to limit and stop, offense from happening in the first place, which is ideal versus just, reacting and blocking shots and things like that. Those are the two that stand out for me. The other player that that I don't think plays enough on the penalty kill is Alex Tuch. Because, you look at the foot speed he has, and I think that he's someone who can read plays really well because he's used to those offensive situations. So I'm going to rank Cozens because of what we've actually seen him do. Okposo behind, and now I want, the player I want to see move up and get more opportunity is Tuch.
Okay. The gold standard in the NHL over the last 10 years, possibly, for a center that can kill penalties and can put up points, but always seems to be the best responsible center in the NHL is Patrice Bergeron. Am I crazy to think that Dylan Cozens, with his maybe penalty kill responsibility, not as a top line center, but as a second line center, could be utilized as a shutdown center? Like, am I crazy to think that maybe that's a Bergeron in the making type of player?
I think Bergeron sets the bar so high above everyone else, but I do like the idea of him following that path because Bergeron's a perfect example of why you don't need to be, passive. You don't need to have defensive players only. There's value to having players who are straight up strong defensively on your penalty kill, but you don't want it that you're one dimensional. You don't want it that your job is to just react to what the other team's doing and you bring absolutely nothing else to the table. You want it that you're a player like Bergeron who's so smart with his stick, who knows how to block passing lanes, who knows how to disrupt play and intercept pucks and turn play the other way. That is the gold standard everybody should want for their top line center and second line center and top penalty killing center. That's the player that you want everyone to fit the mold into. If Cozens could follow that path, and there's definitely a possibility for that to happen, then he's going to have a really great career.
Fascinating breakdown of special teams here, and obviously moving forward when the Sabres get back at it tomorrow against the Flames, they hope that they can be that much better on the penalty kill and get a little more in a groove on the power play, which was quiet before the break, but they're still top 5 in the NHL. All right, the fun stuff now, or even more fun stuff, I should say, Shayna, as we get closer to the trade deadline. We talk ad nauseum. So many similar names. They get recycled all year long, right? The Marty and I have been trying so hard to bring new names to the rumor mill this week, or, something that would be cool and fresh from a trade idea. Do you have names out there that you're looking at that the teams could benefit by, maybe going off the beaten path a little bit here?
So everybody in the league loves to talk about the Tampa Bay Lightning third line. They're legendary. They're the new look grind line. It was Yanni Gourde, Blake Coleman, and Barclay Goodrow. Everybody wants to repeat that, and I completely understand why. The thing about it is you have to find the next version of them. You don't want to hand out a ton of money to Blake Coleman like the Flames did and Barclay Goodrow like the Rangers did, who've been there, done that. You need to find the next wave of them, and that's what they did in Hagel. So you got to find them this year. On the lowest end of the spectrum, the cheapest, lowest risk version of that right now, to me, is Colin Blackwell. And he was that player last year too, and we saw Toronto acquire him for good reason. He was good with the Rangers, he was good with Seattle, and he was good with Toronto. Blackhawks, no one's going to be good on. So that's totally okay. But I think he's the utility forward that teams need to be looking at because he's super cheap and he's very good. He's someone that isn't just a defensive weight. If you're going to play with top players, which is not the ideal role for him, but if you need him to, he can. He doesn't hold back his players. He lets them thrive, and he's the stabilizing force, whether it's on the wing or down the middle, because he can play both. And he's a really good penalty killer. Better yet, he's a power killer. He fits into the power killing variety. He's someone you could throw over the boards first. You can throw him over the board second, and you can just let him do his thing. He has that disruptive ability. So for me, that's the player I think more teams need to be talking about.
And plus, he wears a fantastic, I should say, number. He usually wears 43, so I got to give him props for that.
Does anybody even know what number he wears in Chicago?
I don't know if he wears that in Chicago, but I know he did wear number 43.
Bring him home, as we like to say. The former Amherst, of course. Colin
Absolutely,
Blackwell.
former Amherst. That's right. The Rangers, who acquired, guys last year at the deadline, but hardworking type of third line Tampa Bay style they did last year. This year, they go for Vladimir Tarasenko. I pulled up a ton of numbers on Tarasenko, and I'm looking at it, and I say, this is going to be a straight rental. There's no way they're going to look at Tarasenko's numbers after the injury and this season and think that he can continue to play at the rate that he was 5 years ago. What do you think on Tarasenko and the Rangers?
I like it. I like it for them. You look at him last year and you could see how he finally looked healthy. The shoulder was going for him. And the most important thing was they gave him an elite playmaker in Robert Thomas. He's really good at driving to the slot. He has great finishing ability, but he needs someone to do a lot of the puck carrying to get to that point, which Thomas did. So for the Rangers, you think of Artemi Panarin, elite in transition, elite playmaker. He needs a really strong finisher, and he just hasn't had that. You look at the options, it's been Ryan Strome, it's been Andrew Kopp, it's been Vincent Trocheck. He needs someone that takes it up a notch. That's sole purpose is to finish the chances Artemi Panarin can create. I think it's a good fit. I do think that line is going to be pretty rough defensively. So that's why, like, right now, I know they're going with Zibanejad to start, and that's fine. I think Trocheck's the better center for him, because then you could put Zibanejad against top competition, which is better for them. And that's what they, rolled with up to this point. But I do like it as a straight rental, because they're going to have rising costs this summer in players like Keedle and Miller. So they shouldn't be overcommitting.
Yeah, it's a really fair point on the rental idea. I do wonder beyond New York, though, which seems like a good fit for him. I do wonder what the marketplace is going to be like. It's funny. We always wonder about it. And then, summertime rolls around. It's like, oh, somebody's magically got 6 to 8 million for somebody. It's like, where did that come from? Anyway, we'll see how it goes for Tarasenko. But there are so many injuries the last few days, most of which, I think are the short-term variety. Obviously, Jack Hughes week to week was one of the big ones. Even last night, we saw Logan Thompson leave a lopsided victory early in the third period. He's getting an MRI today. Burakovsky for Seattle is out week to week. The Kings are getting a little healthier with Kaliev close and Moore expected soon as well. Are you seeing any change of course, urgency based on injuries around the league here, and or added insurance policies being needed, Shayna?
So Seattle's a good one to mention with Burakovsky, because the entire year we talk about how they're greater than the sum of their parts, and look at all the depth scoring that they have. If you lose one of those key contributors at the top of your lineup, like Burakovsky, I think it's going to show the holes in that strategy. And it's a strategy I actually like. They're so intriguing to me because they're approaching things differently than everyone else. But I think it puts even more pressure on them if they want to contend. And I think they're the team that's not going to go for a rental. They want something a little bit more long-term, and that's completely fine. I think that's, a more sustainable strategy anyway. I think this might be like the wake-up call to them of like, you need an extra bit of oomph in your lineup, however you can get it on the wings. And if you get it, at the deadline, and you get that long-term piece, if you lose someone in the postseason, you have more options. Obviously, they can elevate players like Tolvanen, like, to a higher role. That's, the flexibility they have. But because they're lacking star power, I don't think they can afford to lose any of the top wingers that they have that actually bring it.
And they've been compounded lately by scoring droughts for both Beniers and Eberle, which they've not had, and especially Beniers. He's been so consistent all year. And yeah, it was very pronounced last night. And what was otherwise a good game for them against the Devils, they just didn't have the offense, Marty, that they'd kind of come to expect here.
Yeah, no, and that's going to happen. But now it's been a couple of games that it's happened, and Seattle's got to get themselves going again. But when you talk about Logan Thompson and the Vegas Golden Knights, I actually had Vegas as a team that could look to add a goaltender, and if there's an injury and if it's going to be a little bit longer term, they will need to. A couple of names that are kind of doing the rumor mill right now is Cam Talbot and my best friend James Reimer, because I keep bringing him up and Duffer shakes his head every time. But anyway, I'm looking at them and they're like in the 40s and 50s when you look at goal save above expectation this year's. Like, is there like not a good goalie market for LA or a Pittsburgh because of an injury, or a Vegas because of an injury to dip into?
I feel like there's just too many teams that need a goaltender. It's an okay goalie market. And I mean, you could speak to this better than me, but I can't imagine it's easy as a goaltender to move at the deadline, especially if you're not a starter, because how much time do you have to really adjust to the new coaches, your goalie coaches, the team system in front of you? Like, that's really tough. James Reimer, I like as, a rental option. I kind of like the idea of him going back to Toronto, although I think he does deserve a little bit better than that. I just think the storyline would be so fun.
He would veto that like in a heartbeat. He's not getting anywhere close to Ontario. Let's just put it that way.
Good for him. He's earned that. I think with a better team in front of him, I think he'll be fine as like a 1B goalie. Cam Talbot, it's a little bit tricky because even we saw him with Minnesota last year have stretches of really strong play, and they're the best defensive team. But even behind that team, he wasn't perfect. There's a reason why that they went for someone else, and he's been managing the Cavs a bit in Ottawa, but like, who among us wants to play behind that team? Yeah. The name for me is Karel Vejmelka. If Arizona is willing to move him, because sure, Arizona wants to get rid of everybody and perpetually rebuild. And okay, that's your decision. That's the goalie, though, I think everyone should be looking at. He's really impressive to me because the team in front of him has been bad. And it's not like he's had one hot stretch behind a terrible team. He's been legitimately good. Like in the beginning of the year, I think it was November, he had some of the best numbers in the league among goalies. It was him and Ilya Sorokin, and he's had the much tougher workload. So a lot of credit to him. I think him in Vegas could be kind of fun if Thompson's out long term.
Yeah,
Right
they
catching
did
goalies, eh, Duffer? They would love their right catching goalies, and with Logan Thompson and
it's really the only way to go. Yeah, he can borrow his gear, which
Thompson's got like 5 sets. I'm sure he can work. Different brand though. Thompson's a Bauer, Vemelka is a Warrior, so that's what it is.
I love how you know that on hand too. Like no one else would be able to just
I'm a goalie geek. You have to know that, but yes.
Yeah, Shayna, the only reason Vasilevsky pitched his first shutout since November of 21 last night was the fact that he was wearing new Bauer gear. Marty texted the group early last night saying this is going to happen. So yeah, it's amazing. Now the broadcast in Vegas did mention that obviously Laurent Brossoit would be first up here in case Logan Thompson is unable to go. He's played more than 20 games in the AHL this year. His numbers are okay. And wouldn't that be just a strange turn of events based on how the carousel has gone round? Last one for you real quick. It's not a super interesting name to me, but it's a name that never goes away. But it might finally leave Edmonton. Will anybody benefit from Jesse Puljujarvi when he's either put on waivers or traded here in the very, very near future?
Yes. Free Puljujarvi, get him out of Edmonton. That player needs a change of scenery more than anybody has in quite some time. He's a good player, and I don't think he's going to be like a Val Nichushkin 2.0. I feel like over the summer, that was the conversation because it's like, look what happened to Nichushkin in Dallas, and nobody recognized, his two-way ability, and I totally think that's true. And I think to an extent, that's the case here. I just don't think it's to the same degree. I don't know if he has the full disruptive finishing ability, everything that makes Nichushkin so special, but like get this man on a new team, give him a new opportunity, new coaches, new vibes, new market, new everything. He needs it because I do think the skill's there. He just needs to find literally anyone that can help him, actually reach it.
Yeah, it's
he needs to keep his tongue in his mouth. It reminds me of Yoni Pitkinen with the Flyers back in the day, and there was who was it with the Colorado Avalanche, that Finnish guy that used to always stick his tongue out. I'm like you don't look like a hockey player. I don't care what your numbers are telling me. It looks weird. Keep it in your mouth.
I love it. It's quirky. It's
quirky
cute. It's
is
quirky.
the best.
I think it's great.
That is the absolute best way to describe it, and has often been attached to many a great Finnish player in NHL history. Shayna, thank you so much. We'll do it again next week.
Thank you.